They said you could hear the blizzard howling before you even saw the clouds, like some angry god prowling the edge of Sierra pines, waiting to tear the world apart. Morgan Reyes believed it. She'd been a ranger for 11 years, but tonight, even she felt something twist in her gut as the wind battered the windows of the outpost. Outside, the snow wasn't falling. It was flying, sideways, slashing across the pines in hard, angry bursts. Trees groaned, their limbs heavy with ice. The temperature dropped so fast you could almost see the breath freeze in the air before it hit the ground. The weather radio on Morgan's belt spat out warnings. Another foot of snow, visibility 0, power lines already snapping. A normal patrol would be suicide, but nothing about tonight felt normal. Morgan zipped up her parka, boots crunching on the wooden floor. She glanced at the battered Mustang waiting outside the back door, his coat slick with sweat despite the cold. Ash had come to her broken, wild, scarred, impossible to trust. Now, in this storm, he looked like something carved from the wind itself, nervous, nostrils flaring, hooves dancing restlessly. She paused, resting a hand on his neck. "Easy," she murmured, but Ash jerked away, eyes wide, almost wild again. Her team was already waiting. 3 rangers, faces tight with worry. "Morgan, are you sure about this?" one of them said, voice barely a whisper over the roar. "Nobody's going out in this, not even search and rescue." Morgan shook her head. "We don't have a choice. There's a hunter missing, truck abandoned on Mill Creek Road. No cell signal, not since noon. If she's still out there, she won't make it till morning." Ash stomped, tossing his head. For a second, Morgan caught something in his eyes. Panic, fear, and something else. Urgency. The patrol snowmobiles growled to life, lights cutting swaths through the blizzard. The group set out, headlights bouncing, boots leaving desperate tracks in the deepening snow. The forest swallowed them whole, trees looming like ghosts, every branch a claw. For half an hour, they fought the storm. Wind screamed, the world narrowed to a tunnel of light and spinning flakes. Then, without warning, Ash let out a wild, piercing call. He reared, yanking the lead from Morgan's hand, plunging straight into the blinding white. "Ash, no!" Morgan yelled, scrambling after him. Her team shouted, "Wait, Morgan, stop!" But she was already running, stumbling over drifts, heart hammering. Ash tore through the trees, snow exploding around him, tail streaming behind like a shadow. He paused, sniffing the air, ears pinned. Morgan caught up, gasping, cursing under her breath. "What are you doing?" she started. But Ash was gone again. Deeper, faster, leading her away from the trail, the search, everything safe and familiar. Behind her, the team hesitated. One called over the radio, "Reyes, come back, we'll lose you both." Morgan ignored it. Something in Ash's urgency was too sharp to doubt. Branches whipped her face, her gloves numbed. The world shrank to Ash's tracks, a wild, twisting line vanishing into darkness. Morgan's flashlight flickered, her breath coming in harsh, ragged bursts. Then she heard it. A sound that wasn't the wind. A low, desperate cry, barely audible. Morgan froze, every sense straining. Again, there, a voice, hoarse, choked, carried by the wind. Ash snorted, digging at the snow, eyes locked on a dense thicket. Morgan pushed through, branches clawing at her jacket, snow filling her boots. In a hollow beneath the pines, something dark moved, a shape slumped against a tree, bound at the wrists. Head lolling. "Jesus!" Morgan dropped to her knees. "Hey, can you hear me?" A woman, face blue with cold, lips cracked, tried to lift her head. "Help! Please!" Her voice was barely more than a breath. Morgan fumbled for her radio. "I found someone! I need backup! Now! Coordinates!" The words tumbled out, shaky, desperate. Ash circled the clearing, body tense, eyes never leaving the darkness beyond. He let out a low, rumbling whinny, half warning, half challenge. Morgan worked fast, knife out, slicing the ropes, hands shaking so bad she almost dropped it. The woman collapsed into her arms, sobbing, breath rattling. Morgan tore off her gloves, pressed them to the woman's frozen hands. "Stay with me! What's your name? Who did this?" The woman's eyes flickered. "Lila. Lila Tran. Don't let them find me." Behind them, the blizzard howled. Ash pressed close, body blocking the wind, his breath steaming in the cold. Somewhere deep in the woods, something watched, a shadow moving just out of sight. Morgan glanced up, heart pounding. The storm felt alive now, hungry, as if it had secrets to keep. And Ash's whole body trembled, but he never looked away from the darkness. Morgan followed his gaze, feeling, for the first time, that this night was bigger than any rescue. Something was hunting them all, something wild, furious, and not done yet. The radio crackled. Her team was closing in, but the storm screamed even louder, swallowing their voices, erasing the line between hunter and hunted, rescuer and lost. Morgan gritted her teeth, pulling Lila close, Ash standing guard, snow piling around them. Somewhere in the roaring blackness, fate shifted, and the true reckoning of Sierra Pines began. Morgan's breath steamed in the icy air as she cradled Lila Tran, feeling the woman shiver violently in her arms. All around them, the blizzard pressed in, unyielding, furious, determined to erase every living thing in its path. The world felt impossibly small, just Morgan, Lila, Ash, and a swirling white darkness that had already swallowed any trace of trail or sky. Footsteps pounded through the trees. Morgan's team burst into the clearing, faces flushed and desperate. One knelt beside her. "We heard you on the radio. What happened? Who is she?" "She's hurt," Morgan replied, voice clipped with urgency. "And she's freezing. Get the med kit, now." The youngest ranger scrambled to open a pack, hands fumbling with blankets and chemical warmers. They wrapped Lila, her skin ice cold even through Morgan's gloves. Ash stood rigid, body tense as a bowstring, ears flicking to every sound. The wind howled louder, rattling the branches overhead, as if warning them not to linger. Morgan looked at Lila, her face battered, hair matted with snow, eyes wild with exhaustion and terror. Morgan crouched beside her. "Lila, you're safe now, okay? Who did this to you? Why were you tied out here?" For a moment, Lila stared at her, lips trembling, as if deciding whether to trust her voice to the world. Then she glanced at Ash, her gaze locking on the Mustang's jagged scars, the lines running deep under his thick winter coat. Lila stammered, fighting to form the words. They wanted me gone. I tried to tell them. I couldn't let them." She broke off, coughing, a sound sharp and desperate in the cold. Morgan exchanged a glance with her team. "Let who do what?" "Lila, we need to get you back to the station, but if you know something, you have to tell us now." Lila swallowed hard. Her eyes darted to Ash again, haunted. "It's called Project Ironhoof. It's bad. Worse than you think. They took wild Mustangs, dozens, maybe more. Government men, contractors. I saw what they did to them." The words landed heavy in the frigid air. Morgan's blood ran cold for a different reason. She looked at Ash, his flanks still trembling, nostrils wide as if reliving some old, savage memory. "What did they do?" Morgan asked quietly, her own voice sounding strange to her ears. "They experimented. Not with machines, with the mind," Lila whispered. "Isolation, drugs, light, sound, pain, fear. They wanted to break them, control them, turn them into weapons. Ghost was the first, the strongest. Ash too. They all suffered. Morgan reeled, fighting to process this. She had heard rumors, stories of missing horses, unexplained government trucks in the high meadows, horses that returned to the wild acting strange, unpredictable. But nothing like this. A sudden crash echoed through the forest, branches snapping, a shadow darting across the snow. The rangers froze, reaching for flashlights and radios. Ash bared his teeth, snorting, stomping the ground, blocking the group with his body. Morgan's radio crackled, static and a garbled voice. "Weather's getting worse. Shelter now!" The storm wasn't going to wait for secrets. "We have to move," Morgan barked. "Pack up. Get Lila on the sled. I'll lead. Ash stays with me." The rangers worked quickly, rigging a makeshift sled from an emergency tarp and rope, bundling Lila tight in blankets and strapping her in. Morgan kept one hand on Ash's halter, feeling the horse's muscles bunch and twitch under her grip. She watched the tree line. Every shadow seemed alive, watching, waiting. They started back, headlights barely piercing the swirling snow. Ash stayed close to Lila's sled, muscles taut, eyes scanning the woods. Morgan's mind spun with Lila's words. Project Ironhoof, psychological conditioning, weaponized Mustangs. Every rumor she'd dismissed, every scar on Ash's body, took on a new and terrible meaning. Halfway to the station, the sled jolted. Something moved in the darkness. Morgan spun, flashlight cutting through the storm. For a heartbeat, she saw a shape. Large, white, spectral, watching from the trees. Ash reared, letting out a scream that cut through the blizzard. The shape vanished, swallowed by the storm. Morgan's heart hammered. "What was that?" a ranger shouted, panic crackling in his voice. Morgan shook her head. "Keep moving, don't stop." The group pressed on, boots dragging through knee-deep drifts. Morgan glanced at Ash. He was sweating again, even in the cold, breath coming hard, as if fighting memories as real as the snow beneath his hooves. They reached the ranger station at last, battered and half-frozen. The team rushed Lila inside, stripping off her wet clothes, wrapping her in dry blankets, starting hot water for tea. Ash stayed by the door, refusing to enter, his eyes fixed on the storm outside. Morgan sat beside Lila, pressing a mug of tea into her hands. "You said you tried to blow the whistle. Did someone threaten you? Who left you out there?" Lila's eyes filled with tears. "I tried to warn people. My boss said it was classified. I found files, videos, medical records, logs. I threatened to go public. Next thing I knew, I woke up tied to that tree. They meant for me to die out there." Morgan's jaw clenched. "You're safe now. We'll get the truth out, I promise." Outside, the blizzard raged. Ash paced the porch, his body a restless shadow against the snow. Morgan watched him through the window, realization settling over her like a second skin. Whatever Project Ironhoof was, it had come home with Ash, and it wasn't done with any of them yet. Inside the storm, something else moved, the figure from the woods. Ghost. And somewhere, deep inside the old Mustang, scars burned like fresh wounds, memories rising, unbroken, unfinished, demanding reckoning. The blizzard battered the ranger station all night, rattling the windows and piling snow against the doors. Inside, warmth fought back against the cold. A wood stove hissed and popped, steam curling from mugs of weak tea. Morgan slumped in a battered armchair, her boots still crusted with snow, unable to rest. Every few minutes she'd look up and check the porch. Ash stood outside, his silhouette visible in the yellow porch light, staring out at the storm as if waiting for something, or someone, to return. Lila Tran shivered under 3 blankets on the old leather couch. Her skin was warming, but the tremors wouldn't stop. Morgan's team hovered nearby, trying not to stare at the deep red marks around Lila's wrists and the haunted look in her eyes. Someone tried to break the tension, cracking a joke about the generator, offering crackers and honey, talking about anything except what had happened in the woods. The silence, though, always came back. Thick, suffocating. After a while, Morgan motioned for her team to give them some privacy. They drifted into the back room, voices hushed, as Morgan poured another cup of tea and set it gently beside Lila. "Take your time," Morgan said, keeping her own voice steady, gentle. "You're safe here. Nobody's getting in tonight." Lila let out a shaky breath, her gaze flicking to the door, then back to Morgan. Ash, he knew I was there, didn't he? The horse. He found me before any of you did." Morgan nodded, glancing through the frosted glass. "He's always been different, ever since I got him out of the canyon 3 winters ago. Back then, he wouldn't let anyone near him, covered in scars, spooked by his own shadow. People said he'd never trust a human again. Some days I think they're right." For a long time, the only sound was the wind screaming and the crackle of the fire. Lila gripped the mug in her hands, staring at the swirling tea. "I saw so many like him," she whispered. "The things they put those horses through. We were supposed to be helping them, tracking their migrations, studying their health. Then the new contracts came, black vans, armed men, scientists with no names. They changed everything. They took Ghost first, the biggest stallion, all white, impossible to miss. Then they came for Ash, and the rest." Morgan swallowed, her throat tight. "What did they do?" Lila's voice shook, anger and guilt rising with every word. "Isolation tanks, sound torture, flashing lights, days and nights with no rest. They'd shock them, starve them, then flood their cells with light and sound. They wanted to see how long it would take to break them, make them obey commands, ignore pain, attack on cue. Not every horse survived. Some went mad, others turned mean, and a few, Ash, Ghost, just changed." Morgan pressed her hands together, fighting the urge to punch the wall. "Ash has nightmares. Sometimes he bolts, won't let anyone near him for days. The scars on his legs, his flanks. He got those from the program, didn't he?" Lila nodded, her face drawn. "We all have scars. I tried to stop them. They took my badge, called me a traitor, but I kept the records, hid what I could. I think Ghost remembers me. Maybe Ash does too." Morgan looked at her, really looked. Past the exhaustion, past the fear. "You did what you could. That matters." Lila's eyes filled with tears, frustration and shame boiling over. "It wasn't enough. I waited too long. Too many of them suffered. Ash, Ghost, all of them. And now I don't know what's out there. I saw Ghost in the woods, just before you found me. He's changed. He looked right at me. And I swear, there was rage in his eyes. Real rage. Not just animal fear." Morgan felt the weight of every blizzard, every long night in the forest, settle on her shoulders. Animals remember. Horses, especially Mustangs. They don't forget cruelty or kindness. Outside, Ash pawed at the snow, turning circles. Morgan stepped to the door and opened it, letting a wave of freezing air into the room. Ash turned, muscles coiled, then stopped. He looked at Lila, then at Morgan, ears forward, eyes sharp. For the first time, Morgan noticed how deep the scars ran on his neck and chest, how uneven the fur grew back around them. Ash looked away, snorting softly. "Come in," Morgan whispered, holding the door open. Ash hesitated, Then, slowly, he stepped inside, shaking ice from his mane. He moved close to Lila, lowering his head until their faces were nearly level. Lila didn't flinch. She reached out, trembling, and touched his muzzle. Ash stood very still. For a second, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, pain, a kind of hope. Morgan crouched beside Ash, running her hand down his neck, feeling the raised ridges of old wounds. He survived, Morgan said quietly, voice breaking. Whatever they did, he survived. So did you, Lila. For a while, the three of them just breathed together, sharing the warmth, letting the storm outside rage and batter all it wanted. In that tiny room, trust began to take shape. Fragile, uncertain, but real. The generator flickered. Someone in the back cursed and started banging on pipes. Lila laughed, weak but genuine. Morgan smiled, feeling a weight lift from her chest. Tonight, at least, they had shelter. Tonight, the scars meant they'd lived through the worst the world could throw at them. Tomorrow? Well, tomorrow would bring its own reckoning. But for now, they were alive. Together. Morning broke cold and pale, the snow piled high against the ranger station windows. The blizzard had passed, but its damage lingered. Downed trees, snapped power lines, a world muffled in white. Inside, Morgan moved with a new sense of purpose. The coffee was weak, but it cleared her head enough to think, to plan. She knew she should call the sheriff, report Lila's ordeal, hand everything over. But she'd seen the government trucks herself, and she'd seen how fast secrets vanished in these mountains. Lila sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a borrowed flannel shirt, poring over the few files she'd smuggled out. There were pages torn from lab notebooks, blurry photos of Mustangs in holding pens, spreadsheets coded with strange numbers and terms like neural compliance and subject stress response. Ash lingered in the mudroom, head peeking through the door, ears twitching as if he, too, was listening for the truth. Morgan pulled up a chair, sitting across from Lila. You said there was a facility up in the high pass, a place where they ran the program. Is it still there? Lila shook her head. It was abandoned last year. After Ghost escaped, they pulled out overnight. But there might be records left behind, equipment, something we can use to prove what happened. If we're careful, we can get there and back before dark. Morgan hesitated, weighing the risks. We'll need to move fast and quiet. I'll take Ash. He knows the way better than anyone. The others will cover for us. Say we're checking storm damage. Lila nodded. She looked out the window, her voice a whisper. I keep thinking about the others, the ones who didn't make it out. Someone needs to know. Within the hour, they set out. Morgan on Ash's back. Lila bundled in Morgan's heavy jacket, riding pillion. The snow was deep, but Ash carved a path through the drifts, muscles bunching with every step. The world was silent, broken only by the distant croak of a raven or the soft creak of snow under hoof. They traveled up the mountain, the air growing sharper, the trees thinner and more gnarled. Lila pointed the way, guiding them off the main trail, into a thicket of stunted pines and broken fences. After an hour, they reached a chain-link gate, its lock broken and half buried in snow. Beyond lay a row of low, concrete buildings, windows shattered, paint peeling, the whole place abandoned to the elements. Morgan dismounted, tying Ash to a fence post. The Mustang's ears flicked back and forth, body tense, but he didn't bolt. Lila led the way, boots crunching in the icy gravel. Inside, the air was stale and cold. The first building was empty except for overturned tables and shredded tarps. They found a clipboard with a few scrawled notes. Codes and times, nothing that made sense. In the second building, the truth began to show itself. Metal stalls lined the walls, each with heavy harnesses and reinforced gates. Morgan ran her hand over one, finding a faded tag. Subject #007. She turned to Lila, eyes wide. "That was Ghost," Lila said quietly. "He was here the longest." At the far end of the room, there was a tangle of wires, electrodes, and odd helmet-like devices, frighteningly small for a horse's head. A row of monitors sat on a battered table, dust covering the screens. Lila picked up a notebook and flipped through the pages. Sparse entries, more like code than language. Stimulus response elevated. Aggression triggered. Compliant for 3 minutes, then breaks protocol. Sedate. Repeat. Morgan's stomach turned. This isn't science. This is torture. Lila nodded. They thought if they broke the leader, the rest would follow. But Ghost, he never broke, not fully. They searched the building, finding syringes, empty pill bottles, and a wall covered in mugshot-like photos. Each one a Mustang, some with wild, haunted eyes, others hollowed by fear. Ash's photo was among them, taped in the corner, his eyes burning with distrust. In the office, Lila rifled through old files. She froze, then handed Morgan a folder marked Phase 2, Field Testing. Inside were maps of the mountain, coordinates, and a single line. Ghost unaccounted for, highly aggressive, extreme caution advised. Morgan felt a chill run down her spine. He's still out there, and he remembers everything. A noise outside made them both jump, metal clanging, as if something heavy had brushed against the fence. Morgan peered through the dusty window. Ash stood perfectly still, but his body was rigid, every muscle taut. He stared into the tree line, unblinking. Lila whispered, "We should go. Someone, or something, knows we're here." Morgan agreed, grabbing the most damning files and shoving them into her pack. They made their way back through the snow, adrenaline making the return feel twice as long. As they reached Ash, the Mustang snorted and tossed his head, pushing his body between Morgan and the woods, as if shielding her from an unseen threat. Before they left, Morgan glanced back at the facility, its secrets exposed, but its pain still hanging in the air like a ghost. "We'll make it right," she promised, unsure if she was speaking to Lila, Ash, or the memory of every Mustang that had suffered inside those walls. The ride home was silent except for the wind. Both women clung to the hope that the evidence would be enough, that justice would come. But as the shadows deepened behind them, Morgan knew their search for truth had only just begun. The sun was dipping behind the snowy ridges when Morgan and Lila finally returned to the ranger station, the stolen files heavy in Morgan's pack and even heavier in her mind. The air outside had a new edge, crisp and restless, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Ash halted at the edge of the clearing, ears pinned, nostrils flaring, every muscle coiled, alert. Morgan slid off his back, motioning for Lila to stay close. "Something's wrong," she muttered, scanning the tree line. The station should have felt like home, a safe haven after what they'd uncovered at the facility. But even from here, Morgan could sense a change, a pressure in the air, a stillness too deep to be natural. Ash pawed the snow, tossing his head, eyes never leaving the dark pines beyond the open field. Lila hugged her arms tight, glancing at the horizon. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Morgan listened. The world was almost silent. No birds, no distant snowmobiles, not even the usual groan of wind through the trees. Just the low, rhythmic crunch of hooves. Morgan's heart lurched as shadows began to move along the edge of the woods. First one, then then a dozen. Mustangs, their coats thick and wild, eyes flashing in the dying light. They moved with nervous energy, shifting and bunching together like a storm about to break. At their center, a stallion stood out, huge and spectral, his coat so pale he seemed carved from moonlight. Ghost. Ash stiffened, letting out a deep, uncertain whinny. The herd halted, forming a ragged half-circle around the station's clearing. Morgan counted at least 20 horses, mares, foals, battered old geldings, all led by Ghost, whose mane whipped in the breeze like a banner of warning. Morgan's team, still inside, hadn't noticed. She waved Lila toward the porch. "Get inside and lock the door. Warn the others. Nobody comes out until I say." Lila nodded, voice trembling. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," Morgan admitted. "But I'm not leaving Ash out here alone." The herd watched her with wild, wary eyes. Ghost stepped forward, pawing at the snow, head high. He gave a guttural call, half scream, half trumpet of rage. The other Mustangs shifted, ears flattening, nostrils flaring. For a heartbeat, Morgan thought they might scatter. But Ghost didn't want flight. He wanted a confrontation. Ash moved between Morgan and the herd, his body trembling but resolute. He lowered his head, meeting Ghost's gaze with something like defiance. For a moment, the two Mustangs seemed to communicate. A silent challenge, a clash of memory and pain. Morgan took a slow step forward, hands open, voice steady but low. "It's okay. No one's going to hurt you. Not anymore." Ghost snorted, stamping the ground, muscles rippling beneath his battered hide. He bared his teeth, and Morgan saw the old scars, jagged, ugly, still pink against his neck and chest. Ghost tossed his head, turning to the herd, letting out another sharp call. The Mustangs began to circle, drawing closer, their fear tangled with aggression. Ghost's eyes locked on Ash, on the scars they both wore. He stepped forward, nostrils flaring, and for the first time Morgan felt a wave of pure hostility, as if Ghost blamed every human for his pain. Ash responded, stepping forward to face Ghost. The two stallions stood nose to nose, bodies tense, breath steaming in the cold air. Then, with a flick of his ear, Ash turned slightly, positioning himself between Ghost and Morgan. Inside, Lila pressed her face to the window, hands white-knuckled. Morgan's team gathered behind her, whispering nervously. Ghost snorted again, louder, more insistent. The herd behind him started to bunch and surge as if waiting for a signal to charge. Morgan's instincts screamed at her to retreat, but she stood her ground, refusing to show fear. "Don't do this," she whispered. "Please. We're not your enemy." But Ghost only bared his teeth, tossing his head violently. He paced back and forth, occasionally snapping at the younger stallions who edged too close. Every movement was a warning. Keep back. Stay away. Suddenly, Ghost let out a wild, furious scream and lunged forward. The herd surged, hooves tearing at the snow. Ash braced himself, teeth bared, holding his ground between Morgan and the charging Mustangs. The tension crackled like lightning, raw and dangerous. Then, impossibly, Ghost halted mere feet from Ash and Morgan. He stared at Ash, searching, perhaps recognizing the pain behind those eyes. The other Mustangs stumbled to a confused stop, shuffling uneasily as Ghost glared at Morgan, accusation in every line of his battered body. Morgan's heart pounded. She didn't dare move. Ash stretched out his neck, brushing Ghost's muzzle with his own, a gesture of solidarity, or maybe apology. Ghost flinched, muscles quivering, then pulled back with a guttural noise that sounded almost like grief. For a long moment, everything held still. The herd stood restless, caught between old fear and new anger. the urge to fight balanced against the hope of freedom. Ash and Ghost regarded one another, two survivors whose scars told the same story, one of pain, but also of endurance. Slowly, Ghost stepped back, eyes locked on Morgan, then Ash. With a low call, he began to circle the herd, driving them into a tighter ring around the clearing, as if daring the humans to try anything. Ash watched, tense but unyielding, refusing to let the Mustangs get any closer to the station. Inside, the team stared in awe and fear, Lila whispering, "He's trying to protect them. He blames us for what happened." Morgan nodded, breathless, never taking her eyes from Ghost. "And if we make one wrong move, he'll make us pay." As dusk settled and the Mustangs held their ground, it became clear that the line between enemy and ally had never been thinner or more fragile. Night descended heavy and absolute, the moon just a faint glow behind thick, restless clouds. The wild herd pressed closer to the station, shifting in the dim light, hooves crunching frozen snow. Inside, panic simmered. Lila and the Rangers had barricaded the doors, hands trembling as they watched the Mustangs outside circle like wary wolves. Morgan remained outside on the porch, cold biting through her coat, every muscle screaming to run, but she couldn't leave Ash, and she couldn't abandon these horses to their fury. Ash stood like a statue between Morgan and the herd, mane ruffled by the wind, body tense and ready to defend or flee. Across the clearing, Ghost moved like a pale shadow, his massive body coiled with power. His eyes glinted, feral, intelligent, wounded. Morgan glanced at Lila through the frosted window. Lila shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks, mouthing, "Don't go." But Morgan took a steadying breath, stepped off the porch, and walked into the open. The crunch of her boots on snow drew every eye in the herd, but she didn't falter. She raised her hands, no rope, no weapon, palms bare. Ash turned, watching her with an intensity that made Morgan's heart ache. Ghost lowered his head, ears pinned flat, his breath puffed in great white clouds, steam rising off his scarred hide. Morgan's voice was low, steady, pitched to reach only the horses. "I know what was done to you. I know your pain. I saw it in Ash. I see it in you. I won't hurt you. I won't let anyone hurt you ever again." Ghost bared his teeth, scraping the ground with a heavy hoof. The herd behind him surged restlessly, eyes rolling white in the dark. Morgan took another step, then another, never breaking eye contact. Her legs trembled, but her voice held. She glanced at Ash, who stood beside her now, pressing his shoulder to hers. Ash lifted his head, exposing the jagged scars along his neck and chest. Deliberate, defiant, showing Ghost what they shared. For a heartbeat, silence held. The world was wind and wild hearts, nothing else. Ghost let out a guttural, broken sound. He stepped forward, huge head snaking out, eyes fixed on Ash's scars. For a moment, the stallion's anger wavered, confusion flickering across his face. He sniffed at Ash, tracing the scars with his muzzle, breathing in the truth of suffering remembered. Morgan reached out, her hands shaking so badly she could hardly keep them up. "You remember her, don't you?" Lila tried to help. "I'm trying now. Please, don't make this the end." Suddenly, Ghost whirled, hooves kicking up snow. He let out a scream that split the night. The herd shrank back, then surged forward, caught between fear and fury. Ash reared, slamming his hooves down, standing his ground between Morgan and the oncoming herd. Ghost charged, but instead of attacking, he stopped inches from Ash, chest heaving, foam at the corners of his mouth. His eyes locked onto Morgan, burning with memories of darkness, pain, cages, men with cold voices and colder hands. Morgan kept her ground, If you want vengeance, take it from me. But you and your herd, you deserve freedom. You deserve peace. Ghost stared at her, a storm of emotion in his eyes. Rage, grief, confusion. He looked at Ash, then at Morgan. Ash gently nuzzled Ghost, touching nose to nose. The contact seemed to unlock something in Ghost. He staggered back, shaking his head as if trying to dislodge the memories. In the station, the Rangers and Lila watched, transfixed, barely daring to breathe. Morgan lowered her hands. We can't undo what's been done, but we can choose what comes next. You're not alone anymore. Ghost's breathing slowed. He stood motionless, flanks quivering, then suddenly sagged, all the fight gone from his body. For the first time, he looked less like a beast of vengeance and more like a survivor, lost, searching for trust. Ash pressed close, flanking Morgan protectively, but also nudging Ghost toward her. The big stallion shook, snorted, then bowed his head, mane falling over his eyes. Morgan reached out, touching Ghost's neck, fingers tracing the scars. The old stallion flinched, then went still, accepting her touch. The herd eased back, uncertainty rippling through them. Ghost lifted his head, peering into the station window. His gaze found Lila. The woman's hand rose shakily in silent apology, or maybe forgiveness. For a long moment, there was only breathing, humans and horses sharing the same frozen air, bound by pain and hope. The violence ebbed, replaced by exhausted recognition. Morgan stepped back, signaling her team to open the door. Lila slipped out, moving slowly. She knelt beside Ash, then Ghost, tears streaking her face. I'm so sorry. I tried. Ghost blinked, then nudged Lila's hand, a quiet acceptance. Ash whickered, as if telling her, You did enough. Morgan rose, voice strong. Let's end this here. No more cages, no more running. Ghost gazed at the herd, then back at Morgan and Ash. With a low, mournful call, he turned, leading the Mustangs away from the station, not in retreat, but in a deliberate, wounded dignity. As the herd slipped into the forest, the threat receded, but the wounds and the hope remained. Inside the station, Lila collapsed into Morgan's arms, sobbing with relief and sorrow. Ash lingered by the door, ears pricked, watching the woods, making sure the past was truly gone. For the first time in years, Morgan felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. The cycle of pain had been broken, not with force, but with a trembling act of trust. Right there beneath the winter sky. Morning brought a brittle peace. The sky hung low and gray, the air sharp with cold, but the world seemed lighter, emptied of some of its dread. The Mustang herd had vanished into the woods during the night, their tracks already filling with fresh snow, but Ghost lingered on the edge of the trees, watching the station with haunted, restless eyes. Ash stood by the porch, steam rising from his back, the wounds of the night before slowly settling into a quiet ache. Inside, Morgan and Lila sat together, neither speaking for a long time. The ranger station felt like a sanctuary for the first time since the storm, a place of possibility rather than threat. Lila sipped coffee, her hands still trembling. Morgan ran her fingers along the files they'd gathered from the facility, thinking about what had to come next. Outside, Ghost gave a low call. Ash's ears perked. Without waiting for permission, he trotted out across the clearing, his stride confident, no longer clouded by fear. Morgan watched, then followed, Lila trailing with her phone in hand, thumb poised over the camera button. Ghost stood his ground, but didn't threaten this time. Instead, he lowered his head, meeting Ash halfway in the field. The two Mustangs circled each other, moving with a careful, almost ceremonial grace. Ash nickered softly. Ghost's body twitched, scars visible even through his winter coat. Morgan stopped a few feet away, keeping her hands visible. "You're free to go," she said gently, speaking to them both. "Nobody's coming after you. Not ever again." Lila hit record, her camera catching the moment as Ghost turned, looking at the ranger with something like understanding. The rest of the herd began to emerge from the woods. Mares with new foals, battered old stallions, young colts full of nervous energy. Ghost whinnied, sharp and commanding, and the herd gathered, circling the clearing's edge, unsure but curious. Morgan took a slow breath, raising her voice just enough to carry. "You're not alone anymore. We see you. We know what happened. The world will know too." Ghost tossed his head, as if testing her words. Then, slowly, he turned to Ash, touching noses, a brief, silent conversation. Ash stepped away from Morgan's side, placing himself between the herd and the station, mirroring Ghost's old role as protector. Ghost moved to the front, gathering the herd's attention. Ash let out a long, low whinny, urging the others to follow Ghost. The battered white stallion paused, glancing back at Morgan and Lila. His eyes held a challenge. "Do not betray this trust." Lila kept filming, her breath coming in short bursts. She whispered, "This is proof. This is what they tried to erase." Morgan nodded. "We're going to make it right, starting now." Ghost began to lead the herd away from the station, his steps slow and regal. The other Mustangs followed, first the bravest, then the young, finally the weary and wounded. Ash hung back until the last moment, looking to Morgan for permission. She stroked his neck. "Go with them. Keep them safe." Ash whickered softly, then trotted after Ghost and the herd, his stride long and strong. For a moment, Morgan felt a pang, loss and pride tangled together. As the last Mustang disappeared into the pines, Lila lowered her phone, tears streaking her cheeks. "We have to show this to everyone. People need to see what was done to them, and what they're capable of when they're free." Morgan nodded, her heart pounding with a new urgency. "We'll send everything to the press. No more secrets, no more running." Inside, the station hummed with energy as the Rangers reviewed the footage. The video captured every tense moment. Ghost confronting the humans, Ash mediating, the herd's raw intelligence and emotion. Lila's footage was unfiltered, shaky and breathless, but it made the truth impossible to ignore. They drafted statements, uploading files, sending videos to journalists and animal rights organizations. Morgan called a local reporter she trusted, laying out the story in stark detail. They tortured wild Mustangs for government experiments. We have proof, the records, the scars, the survivors. Lila's hands shook as she posted the footage online, tagging every major outlet, every advocacy group she could find. Within minutes, messages poured in. Shock, outrage, pleas for more information. The story spread like wildfire. Outside, the forest felt different. The old silence was gone, replaced by a quiet anticipation, as if the pines themselves were waiting for what came next. That evening, as darkness fell, Ash returned alone, head held high. Morgan met him at the porch, wrapping her arms around his thick neck. Ash pressed his head to her chest, trembling, not with fear, but with relief. Lila watched, her eyes shining. "You did it," she whispered. "You broke the cycle. You gave them hope." Morgan shook her head, smiling through tears. "We all did. Ash, Ghost, the herd, you. All I did was listen." For the first time since the storm, Morgan let herself hope. The battle wasn't over. There would be backlash, investigations, maybe even threats, but the truth was out. The Mustangs had chosen trust over vengeance, and the world was watching. That night, Morgan sat with Ash in the barn, brushing his mane as the wind whispered through the eaves. She thought about scars, how they marked pain, but also survival. Ghost and his herd were out there, wild and free, no longer prisoners of their past. And for the first time, Morgan believed they could all find peace. The world changed in a matter of hours. Lila's video, raw and trembling with urgency, swept across social media and into newsrooms from Sacramento to New York. Footage of Ghost and Ash, scars visible, eyes sharp and intelligent, leading the battered herd into the trees, captured the attention of millions. Lila and Morgan's voices wove through the images, laying bare the cruelty and secrecy of Project Ironhoof, refusing to let the story be twisted or buried. Within a day, local reporters crowded the gates of Sierra Pines, their vans lined up beside the snowbanks, satellite dishes spinning skyward. The phone at the ranger station rang off the hook. Journalists, animal welfare groups, politicians, angry townsfolk demanding answers. Some brought flowers and apples for the horses. Others brought cameras and tough questions, not satisfied with easy answers. Morgan stood on the porch with Ash beside her, facing a sea of microphones. Lila stood to her left, pale but determined, clutching a folder of evidence close to her chest. Morgan's heart hammered in her ears, but she met the crowd with steady eyes. "We did not seek this attention," she began, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "But these horses deserve justice. They deserve to live free. So do all the people forced to hide or stay silent. We're not going to let this disappear." Questions flew, fast and heated. Who authorized the experiments? Where are the rest of the Mustangs? Is Project Ironhoof still active? Morgan fielded each question with the same calm, unwavering honesty she'd shown facing down Ghost. "We've handed every file to federal and state investigators. We demand full transparency, and we will not let up until there's accountability for every horse, every whistleblower, every victim." By sunset, the nation's attention was fixed on Sierra Pines. The Department of the Interior issued a statement. Project Ironhoof was being formally reviewed, all related operations immediately suspended. It wasn't enough, but it was more than Morgan had dared hope for just days before. Lila spent hours in interviews, her voice steadier each time. She showed photos, data, and the faces of the Mustangs who had survived, making it impossible for officials to pretend ignorance. The local community, once wary of wild herds and government secrecy, began to rally around the Mustangs. Fences came down, and volunteers organized search parties, not to chase the horses away, but to ensure they stayed safe, that none would be recaptured. Children made welcome home banners, hanging them from trees and signposts. A rancher who'd once lobbied for more aggressive wild horse roundups arrived with a truckload of hay and a promise to let the herds cross his land unharmed. One night, a candlelight vigil was held outside the station. Dozens stood in silence, bundled against the cold, each holding a single flame to the darkness. Morgan and Lila joined them, their breath misting in the night air. The crowd listened as Morgan spoke, her words carrying through the trees. "Freedom is the right of every living thing. Tonight, we stand together, not just for these horses, but for all who can't speak for themselves." Ash stood quietly at Morgan's side, his presence grounding and steady. The vigil became a gathering place, a symbol of new unity in Sierra Pines. Old divisions, rancher versus ranger, local versus outsider, fell away as people found themselves fighting for a common cause. Meanwhile, the investigation into Project Ironhoof gathered speed. Lawmakers in Washington demanded hearings. Animal welfare groups launched lawsuits. Lila and Morgan, now protected by federal whistleblower status, traveled to testify before Congress. The evidence was overwhelming. Medical records, video footage, testimony from former staff. The truth could not be ignored. When the announcement finally came, Project Ironhoof was officially terminated, its managers placed under arrest. There was no celebration, only relief. Lila wept in Morgan's arms, overcome by the knowledge that no more Mustangs would face what Ash and Ghost had endured. The media spotlight began to fade, but the change in Sierra Pines held fast. The Mustangs, once seen as pests or legends, now became symbols of resilience and hope. Teachers used their story in classrooms. Artists painted murals of Ash and Ghost, wild and beautiful, running free across the town's old barns and empty train cars. Tourists arrived, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous white stallion and his scarred companion. For Morgan, the transformation felt personal. She watched the herds from a distance, grateful not to intrude on their freedom. She joined with others in creating new policies for the protection of wild horses, advocating for sanctuaries, humane management, and public education. Lila poured her energy into organizing Haven Ridge Sanctuary, a vision born from trauma but shaped by hope. The ranger station, once a place of secrets and fear, now served as a hub for community and healing. Survivors, Mustangs, and people alike came together, sharing stories, learning from one another. Morgan opened the doors to anyone who needed shelter, whether two-legged or four. And Ash, who had once been a shadow, now moved confidently among visitors, his story living proof that even the deepest scars could heal. As spring neared, the wild herds began to graze closer to town, unafraid. Sometimes, in the pale light of morning, Ghost would appear at the forest's edge, watching with cautious curiosity. Morgan would meet his gaze, a silent promise passing between them. You are safe. You are free. Justice had come, not as vengeance, but as a shared commitment to never repeat the cycle of harm. The lesson spread, not just through Sierra Pines, but far beyond. Compassion could transform not only laws, but hearts. And in the lingering cold of that winter's end, hope found a place to take root. The first hint of spring crept across Sierra Pines like a secret. Thin blades of green grass pushing through the receding snow, streams cracking open, the wind no longer bitter but tinged with the promise of new life. For Morgan, the change brought a bittersweet ache. So much had been lost in the storm in the years before, but at last there was a sense that something good could take root where suffering had been. Haven Ridge Sanctuary began as nothing more than an idea. 2 words spoken in hope. Late one night as Morgan and Lila sipped tea and watched Ash grazing quietly beyond the porch. We owe them more than safety, Lila had said softly, staring out into the moonlit field. They need a place to be wild, but also to heal. Maybe we do too. Morgan nodded, the idea settling in her heart. The town council, once skeptical, gave their blessing. Donations poured in. Money, supplies, work crews offering time and muscle. Old ranch hands and teenagers side by side rebuilt fences and cleared fields, every hammer blow echoing the new unity Sierra Pines had found. The land they chose for the sanctuary was an old ridge at the edge of the forest, where wildflowers grew thick in summer and the view of the valley stretched unbroken for miles. Fences were built not to confine, but to protect. Morgan insisted on open gates, natural shelters, and trails that let the Mustangs roam at will. Barns and paddocks rose, but so did classrooms, a small clinic, and even a meditation grove under the pines. The sanctuary would heal horses and humans alike. Morgan took on the role of director, though she laughed at the title. She preferred to work beside everyone else, hauling hay, mending fences, guiding volunteers through their first nervous approach to the Mustangs. Lila became the soul of Haven Ridge, her compassion drawing people as naturally as it soothed the horses. She ran workshops on trauma, inviting therapists, teachers, and anyone eager to learn the power of gentle presence. Survivors found their way to the sanctuary. Not just Mustangs like Ash and Ghost, though both returned, Ash as a leader among the herds, and Ghost a wary but steady presence at the forest's edge. But people, too. Veterans struggling with invisible wounds. Kids from rough homes. People who had lost faith and trust, or in themselves. The Mustangs taught them as much as the counselors did, that healing wasn't about forgetting, but about facing scars together, about learning to breathe again without flinching. One morning, a group of children arrived from a city school, chattering nervously, eyes wide as they caught their first glimpse of the wild horses. Ash trotted close to the fence, his mane bright in the sunlight, and stood perfectly still as a young girl reached out with trembling fingers. She whispered, "He's not afraid anymore." Morgan knelt beside her, smiling. "Neither are you." Ghost kept his distance, rarely letting anyone touch him, but sometimes he would appear just inside the tree line, watching as people gathered in the meadow. Lila told his story to anyone who would listen, not as a cautionary tale but as proof of resilience. He chooses when and how to trust, and that's his right. Haven Ridge grew into more than a sanctuary. It became a place of second chances. People found friendship and purpose rebuilding trails or caring for horses too injured to return to the wild. Some, like Morgan's old ranger team, brought their own burdens, finding space to lay them down. Even local ranchers, once skeptical, came to offer help. A former critic of wild horses brought seeds and seedlings to plant along the ridge, explaining, "We all share this land. Might as well do it right." At night, the sanctuary hummed with quiet conversations and the soft sounds of horses moving in the dark. Sometimes around a fire, survivors would share their stories, not just of Project Ironhoof, but of their own battles and scars. Lila listened, her presence calming. Morgan shared her doubts and hopes, always returning to the same lesson. True sanctuary isn't just about safety. It's about rebuilding trust in yourself and in the world. Ash became a symbol for everyone who came to Haven Ridge. He'd suffered and survived, his scars visible, his spirit unbroken. He taught people patience, showing that fear could become courage, and that anger, when met with compassion, could transform into strength. On the first anniversary of the night Ghost led his herd away from the ranger station, the whole community gathered at Haven Ridge. They planted a tree in the center of the meadow, a living monument to what they had all survived and built together. Morgan spoke quietly as dusk settled, her words reaching every corner of the sanctuary. "We can't change the past, but we can choose what we become." Ash and Ghost showed us that scars don't have to mean the end of hope. Here we learn from them and from each other. Here we build something that can last. The night ended with laughter and music, the sounds drifting into the forest where, just out of sight, Ghost watched with cautious pride. Haven Ridge was no longer just a dream. It was a promise kept, a place where the broken and brave could find their footing again, and maybe, just maybe, learn to run free. Time moved differently at Haven Ridge Sanctuary. Seasons spilled into each other, icy blue mornings softening into wildflower afternoons, the hush of winter giving way to a riot of green and gold. But the wounds of Sierra pines, though healing, were never forgotten. Morgan stood at the fence line one crisp morning, watching Ash and the herd move across the meadow, their coats glistening with dew, their hooves churning the ground into new life. She remembered that first storm, the world closing in, the blizzard's howl, and Ash's wild dash into darkness. How close she'd come to giving up, to letting the story end in anger, fear, and loss. Instead, she saw what could happen when compassion found its place, even in the coldest winter. A year had passed since the whistle blew on Project Ironhoof. The world outside had changed in ways Morgan never imagined. Laws were rewritten. Funding for wild horse sanctuaries multiplied. School children sent drawings and letters, sometimes visiting Haven Ridge to see the legendary Mustangs, to hear their story from Morgan, Lila, and the other survivors. The scars remained, but now they were badges of endurance, visible reminders that even the deepest wounds could be honored and overcome. That morning, Lila joined Morgan at the fence. She carried 2 mugs of coffee, her smile bright against the chill. "You're up early," she said, passing a mug. Morgan nodded. Couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts. Too many memories. Lila sipped her coffee, following Morgan's gaze. "You know what I think about? That night in the storm. The way Ash never hesitated. He ran straight into the dark. I think about the people who ran too. Some of them didn't make it, but some did. We did." Morgan was silent a moment, watching Ash nudge a foal away from a patch of thistles. "He taught me more than I ever taught him, about trust, about letting pain make you kinder, not harder." Lila smiled, her eyes shining. "That's why the sanctuary works, because we lead with that kind of strength." A group of visitors approached, some new volunteers, others seeking healing of their own. Morgan welcomed them, sharing the story of Ash and Ghost, of the night when the herd chose trust over vengeance, of the days when the world finally listened. The lessons of Sierra Pines echoed in every corner of Haven Ridge. She gathered the group by the young tree planted in the center of the sanctuary, the Hope Oak, now strong and rooted. Children and adults sat in the grass as Morgan spoke. "Real freedom isn't just escaping from what hurts us," she said, voice steady. "It's facing pain, honoring our scars, and helping others do the same. We all carry wounds. Some you can see, some you can't. What matters is how we choose to live with them, and what we give back." She told the story of Ash's return, how the Mustang who once flinched at every touch now led new horses into the meadow, showing them the safe places, teaching them to trust again. She spoke of Ghost, who still came and went on his own terms, proof that some spirits could never be tamed, and shouldn't be. Morgan talked about the people who found sanctuary alongside the horses, the veteran who slept for the first time in years without nightmares, the teenager who learned to whisper her fears to Ash, who listened without judgment, the families who came broken, but left carrying a little more hope. Lila shared her own lessons, that justice mattered, but it was only the start. Healing, she told them, required patience, gentleness, and the willingness to see value in every living thing. "Empathy isn't weakness," she said. "It's the greatest strength we have." One afternoon, as the sun fell low and gold over the sanctuary, Morgan walked the ridge with Ash. They paused at the highest point, looking out over the land, the river winding through the pines, the fields wild with horses, the fence lines nearly invisible in the tall spring grass. Ash pranced, muscles rippling, then suddenly took off, galloping down the hill, mane flying, wild and free. Other Mustangs joined him, their bodies moving together in a thundering chorus. Morgan watched them go, her heart light. She realized then that Ash's journey wasn't just survival, it was inspiration. His scars told a story not of defeat, but of what was possible when pain was met with understanding instead of control. That evening, Morgan sat by the fire, surrounded by friends, horses, and laughter. Lila strummed a guitar, music drifting into the cool night air. Volunteers swapped stories. Survivors shared dreams. The boundaries between human and Mustang blurred. Everyone here was healing, together. Morgan's thoughts drifted to the future. New herds, new people seeking sanctuary, the next generation learning from those who had gone before. She felt a sense of peace she'd never known in the wild storms of her old life. As the fire crackled and the stars blinked awake, Morgan spoke, her words a promise to everyone listening, on the porch, in the barn, or wandering the fields beyond. When we break cycles of harm, stand up for the voiceless, and choose empathy over control, we give hope a place to grow, even in the coldest storms. She looked around, at Lila, at Ash sleeping in the grass, at the people who had chosen to be here, to care, to build something lasting. If this story moved you, Morgan said quietly, remember, true sanctuary starts with compassion and courage, one choice at a time. The world doesn't change all at once, but together we can make a start. Out in the pasture, Ash lifted his head to the sky, and for a moment, under the vast canopy of stars, anything felt possible.